1, 2, 3. Are we not quite ready? Is that okay? Okay. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thanks for coming. Hi, my name is Lila King. I lead news partnerships for Instagram, based out of New York. We have some fun things to share today. I'll run through that in just a second. But first, I wonder if you would indulge me. This is an Instagram for news session, so we should Instagram first. If you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna shoot an Instagram of the room. And we're gonna do a boomerang. Are you all ready? Does everyone know what a boomerang is? Okay, so when I say go, everyone make a subtle movement. You can lift your arms, peace sign, whatever you like, or just sit silently like objective journalist that you are. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go! Oh, that was very nice. Yeah, we got it. Very nice, very nice. All right, I'm posting that. I'm posting that on Instagram under the location International Journalism Festival. All right, there we go. Beautiful. Mission accomplished. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm excited to see so many faces here. We have video. So welcome to the Instagram for News workshop. My name is Lila King. I lead news partnerships for Instagram. What I thought we would do today is we've got a couple of different things. First, I brought some best practices and general guidelines for being successful on Instagram as a news organization. And then we have a really a special treat. We have Francesca Triani from Time Magazine here. Hi, Francesca. Who's going to join me and share a really, really amazing project that she's been working on Instagram. And then, of course, leave lots of room for Q&A. And please feel free to stop me as we go, and if you have questions in between. Okay? Sounds good? All right. Excellent. Okay, so first up, just to set context, a little bit about news on Instagram. The way this is structured, I spend a lot of time, especially in the United States, especially in New York, working with news organizations and journalists who are using Instagram to help them understand how to make the most of the platform and get the most value from it. And I get a lot of the same questions as I travel around and visit newsrooms. So what I brought here is some of the top questions that I get and the answers to them, including some examples along the way. So probably the first question, and the broadest and maybe most obvious, is I'm a journalist or a news organization. Why Instagram? Why focus there? Why put energy there? And I would say there are kind of sort of three main answers. First is that there's a very large and growing community on Instagram. It's an incredibly compelling place to build your next generation of news audience. I mean, that you can see here, the platform is growing like crazy. 600 million people active on Instagram every month. The second reason, the second thing to focus on is that Instagram is an incredibly rich source of storytelling and first-person experiences that can help tell the stories that you're working on. You can find people who align with almost any interest or beat in the world on Instagram who are sharing their own first-person experience. And then last, but certainly not least, Instagram is a visual-first medium. And visuals, as we all know, it can transcend the borders of language and geography and are becoming an increasingly important way to communicate with your audiences, especially younger audiences who say hello with a video. It's a language that we as journalists need to learn to speak. Question number 2. So news on Instagram, what does it look like? Is Instagram a place for news? What works? So I brought a few examples. First, naturally, visual news works on Instagram. That's maybe the most obvious. But then a few other characteristics that we find are very successful. First, news on Instagram tends to be more successful when it's very personal. I brought these examples because I think they do a really nice job of using a first-person perspective to help make sense of a big story. This example on the left is from a very recent project from BBC Newsbeat. They were covering the recent headline on recent Brexit headline, the letter delivered. And Brexit is not the most visual story in the world. But what BBC did, which I thought was really smart, was went and found a couple of people and put them on camera, one who was in support of Brexit and one who wasn't, and asked them a set of consistent questions about what they thought, and produced an Instagram story for their account that was really shot on a mobile phone using the drawing tools and text tools that come inside the app, and helping you see from one person's perspective, give a little bit of color to that story. And then the example on the right, that's Anderson Cooper on the election night in the United States. I think the thing that makes these two examples really stand out is that they are both shot on a phone. It's not a whole lot of extra production value. It's not even objectively incredibly high quality video by video and photography standards, but they're really intimate and close and personal, and that's what makes them work. The second thing that a lot of really standout Instagram projects have in common is that they're collective. They represent not just one person's perspective or one organization's perspective, but a collective of the audience plus the organization together. I love this example on the left. It's from Refinery 29, a women's focused publication based in the US. What they did was report on a story that happened right after the US election. One of the subway stations in New York City started filling up with Post-it notes. People put Post-it notes with messages of hope or solidarity or reflections and reactions to the election. And what Refinery 29 did was tell a story on their Instagram about that exhibit that was crowdsourced, and then invited their audience to add their own messages, and then kept adding to their story there. And the example on the right, too, is a super compelling project from the Hindustan Times, where they actually used Instagram stories to teach a group of people, citizen journalists, to go out and collect other stories and bring them back together to tell a single story for their site. And then the third thing that really, the third thing that stands out in Instagram news that is really compelling is that very often it's active. Instagram is a place where individuals come to express their identities and become themselves. And often what we see in news on Instagram is that what breaks through tends to be not just the headlines and the thing that's happening, but actually a call to action to do something about it. It's not necessarily the journalists themselves who are making the call to action, but kind of inspiring people to get involved in a movement or express an opinion or donate to a cause or declare themselves part of something. So the third question that I get all the time is, given the big audience on Instagram, given that it's growing, given that there's a lot of opportunity there, how do I get after that for myself? How do I grow my own audience? So I'd look at it a couple of ways. First is to think about the Search and Explore tab in the Instagram app. That is personalized for every individual user. It's meant to show you as an individual, when you go there, a set of things that you aren't yet following, but you might like based on other things that you're liking or following or acting on inside the app. So when you're thinking about how to make your own work show up on Search and Explore and how to grow your own following, you want to be sure you're there. And the simplest way to do it is to produce something for every section of that surface. So if you look at it, on the bottom it's photos, in the middle it's video, and at the top it's Instagram stories. I mean, really, it's that simple. Produce a mix of photos and videos and Instagram stories, and that gives you that many more chances to show up there when the 150 million people who visit that surface every day look at it. A slightly different way to answer the same question is to look across the board at look at how publishers on Instagram are growing, and what are the things that are common among publishers who are growing really fast. And there are really three. Fast-growing publishers on Instagram in the news space are posting more frequently than publishers who are growing more slowly. They're posting a higher percentage of their post mix that's video, and they have a much more precise offering. And what I mean by that is accounts that do one thing and do it really well tend to grow faster than accounts that try to do a lot of things. So niche accounts that focus on one vertical or one beat or news for one region, tend to be more successful in growing quickly. And then an example here, the Financial Times has done a really great job with this. Toward the end of last year, the Financial Times became one of the fastest growing accounts on Instagram in the news space. And a couple of things that they were doing really well. One, they were using location tags on their posts when they take place in a specific location. It seems really obvious in some ways, but I'm always surprised at how few news organizations are using the location tags. It takes 2 seconds. It's a great way to make sure your post is accessible to people who aren't already following you. They started, for the FT, they started posting more frequently. And also, and I think this is important, the FT on Instagram does what the FT is known for and what the FT does best. They're not posting a lot of travel photos or things that are a little bit outside of their what you would expect from the Financial Times. They're really doing difficult stories, financial news, the kinds of things that are not necessarily the most visual, but they're translating them and making them visual with a lot of infographics, especially moving infographics. Question number 4 out of 5. So Instagram has added a lot of features lately. In August of last year, Instagram added Stories, which is an ephemeral storytelling platform. Instagram has added Live, and of course there are still feed posts. So when you think about covering a story, what do you do with all of those options? What goes where? Here's an example that I think works well around the inauguration in the US in January. Of course, every news organization was there, was trying to figure out how to tell the story. When you looked across the board at who was doing what on Instagram, I found on the left, this is an example from BBC News. This was a moment right before it was right at sunrise and right before the events actually started. And they went live from their account, and it was interesting. It wasn't like there was something huge happening. Like, actually, there was nothing happening yet. It was just literally the sun rising. But it was a moment for the reporter who was working on that account to pause and have a conversation with the people following it about what to expect for the rest of the day, and kind of, in some ways, like stopping and marking the moment and having a collective experience and a collective conversation about what we were all about to watch. The example in the middle is from a local news organization out of Washington, D.C. They used Instagram stories in a really smart way to take their viewers along with them in all the inauguration balls. It was a nice way to say, we've got this awesome ticket. We're about to be somewhere really cool and interesting. Come along with us. We'll do this so that you can be here too. And then the example on the right is from a feed post. It's probably the classic Instagram. It looks sort of like Humans of New York. Someone went to the protest marches that followed the inauguration and took portraits of the people who were marching and asked them why. And they made some really lovely pieces that persist on that feed forever. And then 5th, last but not least, a question I get a lot. What are you guys working on? What's happening? What should we know about? What are the features that we should be using? So I brought a few of the recent ones. First, just a few weeks ago, Instagram rolled out multiple posts, multiple media in feed posts. You can now add up to 10 photos and videos in a single post. It's a great way to be able to tell a longer story in a single post. You can now save a live video. Live on Instagram is totally ephemeral. It goes away the moment you're done shooting. But you can actually save it now. So if you happen to be live and something really amazing happens and you want to keep it, you can save it. Third, this is really important. If you're on Instagram and you haven't turned on two-factor authentication, this is the most important thing I hope you will take away. Please turn on two-factor authentication. It's a really easy way to keep your account safe. Number 4, Instagram in the past few months has spent a lot of time and energy investing in ways to make the platform safe and a safe place for expression. One of the things that we've rolled out is a set of comment controls. So you as a publisher can add your own list of words that, or even emojis that you don't want to appear in the comments on your posts. You're also able to turn comments off if you like. So I know sometimes a news story is hard to take, sometimes conversation gets out of control, sometimes you just want to say, time out, let's take a break, and you're able to do that now. And then last but not least, we have recently rolled out insights for your account. If you're not using insights, you can easily add it by changing your account to a business profile. You just go to settings in the app, switch on business profile, and then you can see things like who your followers are, where they come from, what time of day they're most active. You can see which of your posts is resonating. You can sort by different time frames and different metrics. So it's a good thing to turn on if you haven't. So quickly, 5 things to remember. Instagram is a great place to build a young, engaged audience for news. News on Instagram looks a little bit different from news in other places. It's very personal, it's collective, and it's active. The secret to growth, or the 3 kind of formulas for growth, are post more frequently, make sure you are posting video, and have a very precise offering. 4, real is better than perfect on Instagram. Resist the urge to overproduce. Shoot with your phone. Use the native app tools. And number 5, if you haven't yet, please turn on two-factor authentication. It's simple and easy way to keep yourself safe. So with that, I would be happy to take some questions. But first, I'm really excited to have here, look at that, Francesca Triani from Time Magazine. Francesca, come up.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, awesome. So a lot of the best practices we just looked at are really embodied in a project that Francesca and team have been working on at Time. So maybe we could watch the trailer and then talk a little bit about it. I think this should work. Fingers crossed. It's so powerful. So tell us about Finding Home.
Yes. First of all, thanks so much for having me here. We're very excited about talking Finding Home. We are 3 journalists. I'm a video journalist at Time. I'm working with Lindsay Adair, world renowned photojournalist, and with Erin Baker, our Time correspondent. And we are following for 1 year 3 refugee babies and their families. All the women we're following traveled from Syria to Greece while pregnant. And we're all familiar with the images of refugees desperate coming to the shores of Lampedusa or Greece. But what we don't see usually is what it's like to then continue that journey and try to find a home in Europe. So by now, we've been with the families for 5 months. We filmed the birth of all the babies. And now the families are waiting to find out which European countries will take them in.
And one of the things that makes the project really different is that you're out reporting it. It's ultimately ending up in the magazine and on the Time website, but it's all happening first on Instagram.
Yeah, so Time has never done something like this. Instead of gathering material, reporting, and then releasing at the end of it a magazine story or a documentary, we're actually reporting live on Instagram what we're finding. So everything we gather, all the photographs and video, we post daily to update our readers on what's happening in the families' lives. And when we started this project, we wanted to find a way to do long-term storytelling with short-term stories. And we already published in the magazine, we already published online, but we really wanted to use Instagram. It was the perfect platform for us because we're, first of all, visual, to be able to basically keep a diary and experiment with what it's like to post as you go.
So how does like posting as you go make your reporting different or your storytelling? Well,
we were very nervous initially because as journalists, you're used to keep all your sources secret and all the information to yourself, so the final product is amazing. But it actually has been incredible. We had to learn how to film differently and how to report differently for Instagram. For example, we have been shooting the babies from above so you can see on the platform how they grow over time. And we also, it's helped us a lot in terms of gathering our reporting because we see how people react to our stories as we're posting them. We had people ask incredible questions. We had people engage in a way that it doesn't happen when you're publishing a magazine and then it disappears or you're publishing a video online. So in that sense, it's been very helpful.
I love the example you shared. You're collecting lots of questions. I mean, obviously people have tons of questions. And then you used Instagram Live to answer them?
Yeah, one of our most successful lives, we had a lot of questions from people, and we asked a refugee we know, a 17-year-old kid, to walk around the camp and introduce us to people and answer people's questions. And that was incredible because we were not there acting as filters. This kid, who is super smart, speaks English, taught himself English while waiting to go to Europe, basically. He introduced us to his friends and showed us the camp and responded to people's questions. And, from how to use the internet in the camp to what do you do with your friends when you're 17 by yourself in the refugee camp. So that was just one example. But we've also had people ask questions, and we do reporting based on those questions. We ask our characters to answer questions that people submitted. Yeah.
And one of the women you're following is on Instagram herself.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, first of all, refugees, it's such a hot topic right now that obviously there is some concern of what it's like to talk about refugees on a public platform, but we found an incredibly supportive community. And we have people who comment and like everything we post, we share. And one of the women, she's a first-time mom. Her name is Noor, and her family is under ISIS control, and she can't communicate with them often. And she's very active on Instagram, and I think she found a lot of purpose in seeing that people are following and that they care. When refugees arrived in Greece, they were in Idomeni camp at the border, and thousands of journalists came and told their stories. There's a joke that we say, that the refugees say, that every refugee has spoken with at least a journalist. They all have a journalist's phone number in their phone. But nothing happened. They feel as if nothing happened, no one cared. So when we showed up to the camp, most refugees asked us, why should we talk to you, right? And I think we kept coming back, and they saw on Instagram people caring. Like, they saw people commenting and, liking her outfits or asking her, congratulating her if she got a move to a hotel. And I think it has helped, instead of hurting our access, being so public about our storytelling, it has helped us solidify our relationship with our subjects because they trust our work. They see it every day.
It's really refreshing and wonderful to hear that the response has been positive. I mean, you told me when we were chatting earlier, you told me an incredible example. One of the families found out they're going to Estonia, and we're like, ugh.
Well, yeah. So we've been waiting. Basically, there's one phone call that every refugee is waiting for, and that's a phone call that tells them where in Europe they're going to end up. Most of them want to go to Germany or France. And one family we have been following, we travel with them to find out where you're going to go. And when they came out of the asylum office, their faces were just blank, and they were like, Estonia? And they didn't know where Estonia was. They didn't know how to pronounce it. They didn't know of anyone who lived there, any other refugee. And I think they were nervous about us posting their reaction on Instagram. Are people going to think we're not being grateful? Are people going to judge us for not being excited? Are Estonians going to see this and not be welcoming? And I think, we talked about it, and we had a conversation about the importance of showing the challenges of refugee life, which is you don't know what's going to happen to you. You have no power over your future. And I think that helped them understand what journalism is. And I think they saw people commenting from Estonia, don't be scared, it's cold here, but we're nice. Tell us when you get here. So I think that's been fascinating for us. We were very worried, and we're being very protective about them, but we realized that it was fine.
And we'd be happy to take some questions too from the audience. One thing I'd love for you to share. I think it's interesting you're doing. Your work obviously is journalism first. It's and very principled. There's also you probably get a lot of comments with people wanting to help and wanting to do something. I know you've given some of your storytelling to NGOs who are working with refugees. How does that work?
Well, that's a good question. We are following Time's very strict ethical standards and guidelines when we're on Instagram, the same way we would be for a magazine story. But usually what happens is when you do a documentary at the release, people want to know how to help, and you can direct them. We don't know of any other journalist who has had the problem of people wanting to help while you're reporting the story. We asked the community of documentary filmmakers we know, and they were all like, what are you doing? But I think at the end of it, we decided to partner with the organizations who are actually helping right now in the field, the refugees we're covering. So on Instagram, we organized a takeover with the ICRC and the Red Cross. And also we are funneling any requests for donations to organizations that are already on the ground working with refugees.
So one thing I feel compelled to share, we've seen on news accounts in particular, takeovers tend to work really well. It's that personal thing, like someone putting their face on a story and talking directly to the audience, which is what you were essentially giving right to the ICRC.
And I think for the ICRC, for example, they work with refugees, and their biggest challenge is finding a way for people to connect with stories. And what we are doing is telling a very universal story. Everyone knows what it's like to worry for your family or have a child and worry for their safety. And I think we have seen a higher engagement than your regular account about refugees. It's a very hard topic to make people care about. And so we worked with organizations who do that for a living, that try to have people care. And they helped us in terms of reporting and figuring out access, and we are trying to help them get their message out.
Yeah. I find one thing I think is so compelling about what you're doing on the Instagram account is that it's not just the photos of the things that you tend to see on the front page of the newspaper. It's like what people are eating for lunch and normal daily life struggles, right? It's just so much more relatable in that way.
Yeah, I think this is the whole idea of the story. We want people to really see what it's like to be a refugee, and a lot of times it's waiting and cooking and hanging out and waiting and cooking and hanging out. And one of the biggest things we found that we didn't expect, when we met all the women we're covering, they lived in a refugee camp outside of Thessaloniki, and when the winter came, they were moved to a hotel. And most people would think that's an improvement. It is an improvement. They are sheltered, they're in a hotel, they have hot water. But they completely lost community. They're in the middle of nowhere, separated from all their friends, from all their family, and especially young moms are alone in a room with a baby all day. So we've seen, and NGOs told us that they've seen very high rates of depression and anxiety. And so on Instagram, we were able to show that, I think, in a way that it's harder to do in a magazine story. I can tell you that they're bored and that they're lonely, but I think on Instagram you see their lives, in their simplicity in a way that is a lot more direct. And it makes it easier for people to connect. When we posted recipes that they cooked and people asked us about it, yeah.
And you're doing it both on a separate account, Finding Home, at Finding Home, for those of you who'd like to follow the project. It's amazing. And the Time account. How do those two work together?
Well, we every time there's a bit of concrete news, we post on the Time account. The Time account, I think, has 4 million followers. So we already know. Time has had a long history of supporting visual journalism. And so, for example, when there's breaking news, we post on the Time account. And we keep the Finding Home account as a daily diary, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Questions from the room? Any? Sure. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Good morning. I'm very touched by your project, so it's a bit difficult to ask a kind of nasty question, but I imagine that you get that also more often. Why should I have also Instagram and not just use Facebook Live? Why did you go for Instagram? And also perhaps for you, what are the reasons why we should also go for Instagram?
Well, that's a great question. When we started, we had no doubt Instagram would be the best platform for us. There's just an appreciation for good visual storytelling on Instagram that you can't find anywhere else. There's also a community of people. We have followers that are engaged every single day. Gail from Arizona, right, comments every single thing we post. And it really is unique in terms of how you can experiment while keeping an audience. There's really no other platform for that, where you can post something every day and have people comment in a space that is also very safe. When you're talking about refugees, I think you have to think about that too.
I would echo those things. It's about visual storytelling and storytelling that leads with visuals. So if that's the kind of project that you're working on, then Instagram is the natural place to do it. I saw a question here. Hi.
Hi. So obviously Instagram is a very kind of self-contained platform. You've got the opportunity to put external links in your bio and in some bits of stories. So I'm just looking at the Finding Home account now, and it's great. And I see that you've got a sort of standalone web page with like sort of summaries and longer form pieces on the families that you're following. So is there a kind of tension between the pieces that you put on more traditional places on the internet and the way that you're telling the story on Instagram, and how successful have you been in kind of using Instagram as a platform to redirect users to other places where they can get more information?
That's a great question. We think Time has a lot of publishing platforms, and we think of them completely differently. The people who read Time magazine on print are not the people usually who go on Instagram, and they're often not the people on Facebook, and they're often not the people on Twitter. So there's no tension. Like when every time we come back from a reporting trip, we publish a big spread with beautiful photography on the magazine. The same way we publish, the first issue of this year was a cover with the 4 babies, like each baby had a cover. And we also talk about the story on Twitter from the main Time account, and we tell the story on Instagram. So in that sense, Time has, I think, has been leading in that sense of having video, photography, and print work together in different spaces. I think that's helping us a lot instead of hurting us. I think people from Instagram go to the Finding homepage in a way that is different than people from Facebook going to it. But we've published on Facebook too, the trailers, yeah.
Yes, in the back.
I wanted to ask you, to both of you, how do you judge the kind of interaction you have with your readers and with people following profiles on Instagram, as far as the stories are concerned, since the stories cannot be shared and you cannot like the stories?
So I think I'm understanding your question right. Like, how are you measuring success, or like thinking about success in stories? I'd be curious to hear how your answer to this. I find that, there are literally 2 things you can see. You can see the number of views in stories and DMs, direct messages. So when people reply to your story, I think one thing I hear a lot from news organizations across the board is that they look at the completion rate on a story and as a measure of how successful they are in bringing people along and sustaining interest and engagement over the course of multiple posts. And you can see when you look at your insights, you can see if people just looked at the first post and then skipped to the next thing, or if they stayed. That tends to be kind of a measure of like the quality of storytelling and the degree you're able to like keep someone interested. How does that map to what you see?
Well, I think, first of all, at the beginning, I think we did a lot of mistakes, and we realized that what was not working. Every time that we posted things that were personal, every time that the caption was from our own point of view, or every time we included direct quotes from the subjects, we found a level of engagement that was much higher. The same thing with lives. We've had lives that were not as successful. People weren't as engaged. I think, for example, for a live, for us, we felt that like walking in a space and like bringing people to a place was more interesting, because you have that inherent tension of wanting to see what's going to happen. That was very successful for us. And we started from zero, and we have now a community that is following, and people are asking me what's going on with Helen, when are they flying to Estonia? Like, I think that's a level of engagement that you don't really see in a magazine usually, or even on Facebook. So that's a big success for us.
You mentioned this, like, you mentioned what's successful, like, and you learned because you made mistakes. Would you be willing to share, like, what's one thing that you tried that just like didn't work? It's often helpful to hear the mistakes too, right?
Well, I think when we did lives, this is just for us. I think when we did lives where we were on camera, we're not as successful. I think we're not on camera people. We're like love being behind the camera. So that was not great. But we've seen that working much better on Facebook, than Instagram. we've also some of the things that we found successful that we never thought of doing, like kind of like by mistake, I posted a photo that one of the women sent me from Syria of her hometown in Deir ez-Zor, and that was something that people, like even if the photo was a bit crappy, like they just like love seeing where these people are from. So that was a bit of an experiment that happened by accident. At the beginning, like we started sharing photos of us in the field, and we've seen people react to that a lot. For this story, they're interested about who we are as well. Like as a journalist, usually that's something you don't want to do, to be part of that story. Yeah.
Do you have another question? Sure.
Thank you. As you showed also in the examples or with your project, social media, Instagrams, visual stories on that kind of media are probably more personalized. They are better to be narrow focusing, as you said before. But it is not pushing a limit between entertainment and journalism in favor of the entertainment. And what is the limit for a visual journalism deal with short story and Instagram between these two kind of different language?
That's a very great question. I actually had someone else ask me, like, what's different? Like, are you doing a TV live show of their lives? Like, I think that's a very legitimate question. I think we use the same journalistic standards, and we use so much reporting behind what we do, like that it's not that at all. Like we try not to show it, but you know, to get access, like no journalist had permission to film in the camp when we were there. It took us months to get permission to film in the hospitals, to get that shot of the birth. We had consent from all the doctors. A lot of the information of the numbers that we share on the account, it took weeks of reporting to find, and access that no one else has at the moment. So I understand how it looks simple and pretty on the page, but we are using the same tools that we would be using as if we're publishing on a print magazine. It's just a different platform.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, it's almost a different language or a different set of like tools for communicating a story. But what makes Finding Home so successful, I think, is that you're using like all the same like rules and principles and like doing capital J journalism, but translating it for a different platform that has a different sensibility. Yeah,
and for example, we met with the International Organization for Migration, and if I were to talk about that meeting for a print story, I will have a bunch of numbers that I'm sharing that are boring. There is 11,000 refugees. They finally made their way to Europe. There's 15,000. They're waiting there to travel there, blah, blah, blah. But the way we did it is that we talked about how we had a meeting. Yesterday, we met with IOM. This is all the news we got. Like, it was a lot more informal. And I think, in a way, people remember those numbers better maybe, and they stop for a few more seconds. Like at a time when we're trying to get people to engage, we found that people care a lot more about the numbers if they know the people associated behind those numbers, and they stop and they ask us about it in a way that sometimes the news stories can't do.
Yeah. Sure. Here it comes.
Thank you. I've got a question for both of you. I feel a bit bad asking you about this because what you're doing is so worthy, and I don't want to actually ask this topic, but I don't feel bad asking Instagram. I want to ask about monetization. and you know, these social networks, Facebook, but Instagram in particular, are great for audience building, for storytelling, but ultimately, whether you're a large multinational media organization or you're a small and independent, you need to make money. And just sort of curious what your views are on how Instagram can lead to a monetization strategy. So it's particularly when we're in a landscape where Facebook and Instagram are actually trying to charge publishers to push their content higher. It's almost going the opposite to how it used to be. So a broad, slightly tricky question, but I'd be curious to hear your broad, tricky thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, on the Instagram side, Instagram has been around, not quite as long as Facebook, and Facebook has been making strides. We've certainly been looking at, for example, what Facebook has done with a branded content policy, for example, and those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. What is the right way to do that at Instagram? What makes sense? At the moment, I think the best advice for a publisher is to think about and focus on developing an audience. And at Instagram, we're certainly working on what to do on our side as well.
Well, it's not my job to think about the money, first of all. But I have to say that because we're trying to experiment so much on a new platform, we were able to get grant money from the Piltey Center, which is a well-renowned institution in the US, for those of you who are not familiar. And that's not something that you get easily for other types of reporting. And also, I mean, we just look at platform. For time video, Instagram is just part of it. We have a lot of other sources of revenue. So obviously, we wouldn't be able to do it if we only did this on one platform. We're just diversifying, I guess.
So I have a question for the room. Actually, I'm one of the things that I do is spend a lot of time with news organizations and journalists, helping them understand how to be successful on Instagram. But at the same time, I take a lot of feedback back to the product teams on what journalists and newsrooms would like to see from Instagram. I'm just curious, if anyone would be willing to share, if you could wave your magic wand and change one feature on Instagram or add one feature that would help you do your job more successfully, what might that be?
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, of course. Hang on. Frankly, I work for a very small regional news network as a social media and online news editor. Yep. And we are not allowed to post links in our Instagram posts because we're so small and our account has not officially been validated. That's definitely, we tried to change that because obviously, especially for a smaller organization, it's very valuable to be able to connect links to your posts, which we and many other regional and smaller independent journalists right now can't do. So that would be something. If there's a way to work around that, that would be wonderful.
Great. I would say too, to you and anyone else in the room, there is a Facebook and Instagram help desk that's literally right around the corner. So come and follow up. Let's talk about that there. I'll be there all afternoon if anyone has other Instagram questions. Anyone else? Wish list? Thing you would love to see? Yeah.
We use Snapchat and Instagram interchangeably, and I'm from a news organization in Atlanta. We use Snapchat and Instagram interchangeably, and I think we found that it's more difficult to post text quickly on Instagram stories because there's no just text line feature. It always covers the content. Does that make sense? It's a random one.
So would you tell me what you would love to see?
More of like I'm sorry. Stand up. More of just being able to sort of type and have it sit over a box instead of, right now it's, you can post and then it's living in a big white box, which covers the visual that we're trying to show. So we've had a lot of trouble with that just in the field trying to get it to, work. So that would be great.
Cool, thanks for that. Is it one tip for you and for anyone else who struggles with the same thing? If you update your app to the latest version, there's a new feature that will put a transparent color behind the text so that you can still see what's behind it, but also add whatever context you need with the text. So if you'd like, come by the help desk later. I'll show you how it works. Awesome. Any other questions or wish list items from anybody in the room? Yeah?
Hi. In visual storytelling, has Instagram overcome Snapchat, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question?
About visual storytelling. Instagram is more effective than Snapchat at that moment with stories, live, and other features.
I don't know if that's exactly the way I would answer it. I mean, I think Instagram with stories and live and with the feed posts, the combination of things makes a really compelling way to tell a big story and go deep, like something you've seen in Finding Home for sure. And we're certainly continuing to roll out new features constantly and explore new ways to use it. I think it's a really exciting time to be telling stories on it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Sorry, just
yeah, sure.
I know I've already asked a question. Just wanted to add a suggestion that you're asking.
Please.
I'd love to be able to schedule natively within the app. Sorry, I mean scheduling is quite important for what I do, and I have to use an external app to do it, and I feel like it has an effect that's not good, and so on. So, especially from desktop. Sorry, yeah, scheduling from desktop would be amazing. Please.
I've heard you. Yes, thank you. You probably won't be surprised to hear that's a pretty common request. One thing I'm curious how you do this, Francesca. I would also add there's it's not quite a scheduling tool, but there is a relatively new feature that lets you save a draft post, which you can do, Friday afternoon if you want to save a bunch of drafts for the weekend or something like that. It's a baby step in that direction, but I certainly hear you on that. How do you do it for
I save as drafts, and then I have external apps that help me. One of the tips that you actually gave me a while back was very helpful. Like I do other things in addition to Instagram as a journalist, so it was helpful for me to focus an hour of the day every day to just thinking about scheduling and responding to comments instead of having to worry about it throughout my day. But I mostly try, if I can, to schedule ahead the whole week and then post something every day. And I try to post at the same time to maximize US audience and European audience.
Okay, I think I'm getting the signal. I think we're out of time. I appreciate your questions. I also appreciate your feature requests. I promise I will take that back to our product team. And if anybody has additional questions or anything, we're the Facebook and Instagram space is just right around the corner. Come by, have a coffee, get some help on Instagram. We'll be there this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Francesca. Thank you. Thank you. She's been working on Instagram. And then, of course, leave lots of room for Q&A. And please feel free to stop me as we go, and if you have questions in between. Okay? Sounds good? All right. Excellent. Okay, so first up, just to set context, a little bit about news on Instagram. The way this is structured, I spend a lot of time, especially in the United States, especially in New York, working with news organizations and journalists who are using Instagram to help them understand how to make the most of the platform and get the most value from it. And I get a lot of the same questions as I travel around and visit newsrooms. So what I brought here is some of the top questions that I get and the answers to them, including some examples along the way. So probably the first question, and the broadest and maybe most obvious, is I'm a journalist or a news organization. Why Instagram? Why focus there? Why put energy there? And I would say there are kind of sort of three main answers. First is that there's a very large and growing community on Instagram. It's an incredibly compelling place to build your next generation of news audience. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go! Oh, that was very nice. Yeah, we got it. Very nice, very nice. All right, I'm posting that. I'm posting that on Instagram under the location International Journalism Festival. All right, there we go. Beautiful. Mission accomplished. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm excited to see so many faces here. We have video. So welcome to the Instagram for News workshop. My name is Lila King. I lead news partnerships for Instagram. What I thought we would do today is we've got a couple of different things. First, I brought some best practices and general guidelines for being successful on Instagram as a news organization. And then we have a really a special treat. We have Francesca Triani from Time Magazine here. Hi, Francesca. Who's going to join me and share a really, really amazing project that's really the most obvious. But then a few other characteristics that we find are very successful. First, news on Instagram tends to be more successful when it's very personal. I brought these examples because I think they do a really nice job of using a first-person perspective to help make sense of a big story. This example on the left is from a very recent project from BBC Newsbeat. They were covering the recent headline on recent Brexit headline, the letter delivered. And Brexit is not the most visual story in the world, but what BBC did, which I thought was really smart, was went and found a couple of people and put them on camera, one who was in support of Brexit and one who wasn't, and asked them a set of consistent questions about what they thought, and produced an Instagram story for their account that was really shot on a mobile phone using the drawing tools and text tools that come inside the app and helping you see from one person's perspective, give a little bit of color to that story. And then the example on the right, that's Anderson Cooper on the election night in the United States. I think the thing that makes these changes, that you can see here, the platform is growing like crazy, 600 million people active on Instagram every month. The second reason, the second thing to focus on is that Instagram is an incredibly rich source of storytelling and first-person experiences that can help tell the stories that you're working on. You can find people who align with almost any interest or beat in the world on Instagram who are sharing their own first-person experience. And then last, but certainly not least, Instagram is a visual-first medium. And visuals, as we all know, it can transcend the borders of language and geography and are becoming an increasingly important way to communicate with your audiences, especially younger audiences who say hello with a video. It's a language that we as journalists need to learn to speak. Question number 2. So news on Instagram, what does it look like? Is Instagram a place for news? What works? So I brought a few examples. First, naturally, visual news works on Instagram. That's maybe one, two, three. Are we not quite ready? Is that okay? Okay. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thanks for coming. Hi, my name is Lila King. I lead news partnerships for Instagram, based out of New York. We have some fun things to share today. I'll run through that in just a second. But first, I wonder if you would indulge me. This is an Instagram for news session, so we should Instagram first. If you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna shoot an Instagram of the room. And we're gonna do a boomerang. Are you all ready? Does everyone know what a boomerang is? Okay, so when I say go, everyone make a subtle movement. You can lift your arms, peace sign, whatever you like, or just sit silently like objective journalist that you are.